When we talk about the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, a couple different things we're talking about. On a very specific scale, did it really happen? What's the evidence that it happened? But really, on a different level, we're talking about how much of that story is historically accurate. What kind of historical evidence is there about the life of Jesus Christ? But then on another level, we also need to understand why it happened. So that's a lot to deal with. But the crucifixion of Jesus Christ is the center of Christianity by far, as I've said before. And so we really need to deal with that. So what we're going to do today is we're going to ask a historical kind of question. Historical evidence for the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. So this section seeks to answer this question. Christians claim that Jesus Christ died on a cross and after 3 days rose from the dead. What is the evidence from Jesus, from early eyewitnesses, the Old Testament prophets, and historians about this issue? We're going to answer this over several different lectures. So first I'm going to talk about the kinds of proof that convince us that something happened in history. Now, actually, there are different kinds of proof. The best proof that you can have is physical evidence from the actual time with writing on them. That's the very, very best. I mean, we have that. Remember, the Dead Sea Scrolls are physical evidence that the manuscripts that we have today are the same manuscripts that Jesus read, because of the fact that the Dead Sea Scrolls are physical evidence with actual writing on it from before the time of Jesus. So that's super, super helpful. There are lots of things like that. We'll find letters. They'll find letters, they'll find bills, they'll find travel documents, and all of those things with writing on them especially, they tell us so much more than the physical items without the writing, such as cloth, pottery, buildings, etc. Next importance, so early eyewitnesses, people who saw, heard, etc. And it's important to get that idea of witnesses. We're not talking about what historians said 100 years later. It's very nice, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about actual, real people, eyewitnesses who experienced what we're studying. Best witnesses, those who were in the same time as the event. The key, how early are the written records of what the witnesses said they saw? So if we have things that are written down 500 years later, but if we have things that are written pretty close to when it happened, that's really good evidence. If we have witnesses who are eyewitnesses and they wrote it down, that's super good evidence. Were witnesses still alive and their testimony was written down? Now, let me explain this. The deal with this is, if there are eyewitnesses, people who say they're eyewitnesses, and they say, this is what happened, were other witnesses also alive at the same time? Because if there were other witnesses, they can say, that's not what happened, or they can say, that is what happened. So to have eyewitnesses, early witnesses who actually saw and heard, that's really valuable for history. And it's really valuable to have other witnesses to be there at the same time who can say, yes, that happened, or no, it didn't happen that way. So that's super important, eyewitnesses. Next, written records by ancient writers, such as historians. Pretty valuable. Not on the same level as the eyewitnesses, though. Definitely not on the same level as the physical evidence that we have. Pottery from the time, or stones that have writing on them. That's the best. But written records by ancient writers, such as ancient historians. We have Christians, we have a Jewish, non-Christian historian named Josephus, who writes quite a bit of important information that helps us a lot in understanding Jesus Christ. And then something that sometimes is not really considered seriously is the effect an event had on people at that time. That can be very valuable. For example, we're talking about the New Testament. People, Christians, by the end of the first century, were worshiping Jesus Christ and singing songs to him. That's the effect the story and life of Jesus Christ had on people. That is a part of evidence or historical evidence of what's happened. Most important, physical evidence. Second most important is early witnesses. Next important is written records by ancient writers such as historians. Next importance, the effect an event had on people. So I say this because it's so important. How much evidence do we need in order to be 100% positive that something happened in the past? Yeah. How much evidence? Well, here's an example. The Pharisees and Sadducees, this is in the time of Jesus Christ, approached and, as a test, asked him to show them a sign from heaven. He answered them, "When evening comes, you say, 'It will be good weather because the sky is red.' And in the morning, 'Today will be stormy because the sky is red and threatening.' You know how to read the appearance of the sky, but you can't read the signs of the times. An evil and adulterous generation demands a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah." Then he left them and went away. Now, what does that mean? Well, no matter what Jesus did in front of them, no matter how many miracles Jesus performed in front of them, they always wanted something more to convince them. It was never enough, and it never will be enough. No matter how much evidence we can show people that Jesus died on the cross and why he died on the cross, will never be enough, because the problem is not evidence. That's not what's keeping people from believing in Jesus. The problem is they don't want to believe in Jesus. That's what's going on with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And then here's the same story, and we want to see a sign from you. But Jesus had been doing miracles all around them. They saw the miracles, but it wasn't enough. No matter how much evidence, even if it is right in front of us, we still need faith. And I just want to point out, you may never have thought about this. We say, oh, if I could see the kinds of miracles that Jesus did when he was in Galilee. But the Pharisees were there. They saw those miracles and they crucified him. They saw that Jesus fed 5,000 people and they crucified him. They saw that he raised Lazarus from the dead and they crucified him. Having evidence is not enough. Somehow people need to take that evidence and go to the next step. They need to believe. And that's not easy to do. Sometimes physical evidence is helpful, but sometimes it's not helpful. This is very important. Physical evidence, the people that study that, the study of that, the history of that, it's called archaeology, which means a study of old things. And a study of human history through studying physical items which remain from past events. Now, let me tell you something about this. Two highly trained, highly intelligent, excellent archaeologists can look at the same physical items from the past and come to very different decisions about what they are, when they are from, what they mean. It happens all the time. So sometimes physical evidence doesn't really help. It relies on guesses by archaeologists. And the guesses are about dating of the evidence, what it means, where it's from. What do we learn from it? I'm telling you that good people who are archaeologists can come to opposite conclusions about things. And they may be partially right. They may be completely wrong. They may be totally right. It's just really difficult to make intelligent statements about what happened in the past by looking at physical evidence, unless there's writing on it. Writing makes a big difference. If those archaeologists are materialists, they will never guess anything that suggests a miracle has happened. So now that causes a problem, because lots of archaeologists are materialists. They don't believe in miracles. They don't believe in God. So when they do their archaeological work, if they're looking something in the Bible, well, they're automatically going to assume that it's not true because the Bible's filled with miracles. And so because the Bible has so many miracles in it, well, nobody believes it. If there weren't any miracles in the Bible, I've said this already, but if there weren't any miracles in the Bible, everybody would believe the Bible was the best ancient record of history known to the human race. If there were no miracles in it, there would be none of this ridiculous, denying this and saying that these things didn't happen. Those denials and rejections of the history of the Bible are only because the Bible's filled with miracles, and materialists don't believe in miracles. Let me give you an example. I find this hard to believe, but historians generally claim that King David did not exist, that he was just a legend. Now, in fact, this slab of rock was found in 1992 in Israel. This rock has the name David on it. It's an Aramean king bragged that he had a great victory over two kings to the south of his country. So he's north of Israel, the king of Israel, and the king of the house of David. Now, this is the first archaeological evidence that's physical evidence that has the name David on it. Before this was found, archaeologists said, historians said, most of them, not all of them, but a lot of them said, oh, David didn't exist. It was just a myth, just a story. Now we know it was not a story. We knew that's in the Bible. But now we know from physical evidence, no, David was real. But even now, people who still deny the existence of David, even when we have physical evidence. Here's physical evidence. This is of a guy named Yohanan. Yohanan, I could say it. And Yohanan was crucified in Palestine in the 1st century and had a bone box with his bones in it. And I just want you to see here that here's a piece of wood with a nail through it. This guy was crucified. Here, this is a close-up view of this, over here. And you can see that nail going through the bone. And this is a crucifixion from the 1st century of this guy. And we learned a lot about crucifixion from it. Now, different people might have been crucified different ways. Different Roman soldiers might have had different techniques for crucifying people. We can't say it's always the same, but this is evidence of how Jesus might have been crucified. Here's one that I find super interesting. This is the ossuary of James, discovered in 2002. This is a bone box, and the person would die, they bury him in the ground, and then when his bones were, all of his meat was gone, after 5 years, they dig him up, stick him in a box, like this box. And they called it an ossuary. This guy's name is James. And it's James, Yakub, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. That's what this thing says. James, Yakub, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. It literally says that. Okay. Oh my gosh. Now, that's very strong physical evidence with writing. There was a man who had his father named Joseph and a brother named Jesus. And the chances of that are very, very, very strong. That's Jesus that we know. We know Jesus had a brother named Yakub. We know that Jesus' father's name was Joseph. And I promise you, there are no such inscriptions, writing on rocks that say James, brother of. Because the only reason you'd ever talk about being brother of somebody is if your brother was super famous. So James, Yakub, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus, is clearly saying that this box is the box of the brother of Jesus Christ, James, the half-brother of Jesus Christ. Okay, here's the Nazareth inscription. it's not really, it was found in Nazareth. That doesn't mean it was from Nazareth, but it's an imperial command, either from the reign of Tiberius or Claudius. It's a strong warning about meddling with tombs and graves. Punishment was death. It's a really weird thing to be found. It's from the time of Jesus, and apparently there was controversy about the fact that somebody had been meddling with tombs and graves, and the punishment of taking a body out from the tomb would be death. Now, all I want to point out is the fact that this looks like this may be physical evidence that shows that people were very nervous about bodies being taken out of graves once the body of Jesus was missing from his tomb. Not a definite thing, possibility. Okay, here on the left is what you would see if you looked at this thing. You can kind of see there's a shadow there. You can sort of see it's a man. What's so interesting is that this is a piece of cloth, and Christians claim that this cloth was the cloth that they buried Jesus in. We don't know if it was or not, but I can tell you there's a ton of scientific evidence that it is the cloth that was buried, that Jesus was buried in. And in the old days, not anymore, but in the old days, when you would take a photograph, your camera would create what they called a negative. And a negative had the opposite of everything, colors and light and dark. And on the left, you'll see a negative. You see the light part is actually what's the dark part. And the dark part is actually what's the light part. You look on the right side and you'll see that that's very much so. You'll see that it's like a picture. And so there's a very real possibility that you are looking at something like a photograph of Jesus Christ. Lots of controversy about the shroud. Atheists do everything they possibly can to prove that it's fake, but it's not working. It doesn't seem to be fake. They did carbon-19 dating on it, and it came out that it was from about 1,200 years after Jesus was crucified and raised from the dead. But then they realized that the sample that they used was not original, but had been sewn on there later. And so there's a very, very, very strong chance that this is the actual burial cloth of Jesus. And we don't know how that image got on there. You can't paint it on. It's not paint. It's not normal at all. It's something completely different from anything we've seen. Many scientific tests have been done on it. Like I said, I said 19, it's carbon-14. It's COVID-19. It's COVID-19, carbon-14. They're very different from each other. There's much evidence that the shroud is authentic. Every part of the shroud correctly shows what crucifixion would be like, and that's unusual. This should be considered as physical evidence that Jesus was truly crucified. Hey, there's a picture of it, so you can see what it looks like. The holes in it came from a fire, and it caught on fire a little bit. They rescued it, but that's a part of that. There's never much physical evidence for any people in history, and I would say even more so for the Bible. So the amount of evidence we have for crucifixion is pretty impressive. Let me explain that. There isn't much evidence for the past. The reason there isn't much evidence is because, well, Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70 and then again in AD 134. I mean destroyed. In AD 134, they just basically buried the city and they built a new city on top of it. And I think it's very important to realize that physical evidence was just destroyed. Christian evidence was destroyed because Christians were persecuted for the first 300 years of the history of Christianity. I mean, really persecuted. Persecuted like mobs of people would burn down houses that Christians lived in. Lots and lots and lots of Christians were executed for their faith. Sometimes it was official persecution, sometimes it wasn't official. So we just need to understand. Bibles were burned, evidence was burned, special things from the past were burned. So all of those actions against Christians means we wouldn't have much evidence. But we don't have evidence. We have hardly any evidence, physical evidence for anything. We don't have any physical evidence for Julius Caesar. I mean, we don't have physical evidence from these people. We don't have physical evidence from Secundus the Great. We don't have physical evidence for that. So it's really important to understand that this little bit of physical evidence is really not little. It's really a lot. It's pretty impressive, actually. So physical evidence, there are lots of different kinds of evidence. One is physical. Here is evidence that demonstrates the fact that Jesus really was crucified. The amount of physical evidence we have is pretty impressive. Okay. Now, when you're doing your project, I want to make sure that you keep in mind that physical evidence is not the only evidence we have. There are tons of eyewitness evidence. We have evidence from ancient historians. So we have different kinds of evidence, but there is physical evidence that Jesus was crucified, and it's pretty impressive. So just keep that in mind as you're doing your project.